6, other e-navigation issues. This is Beachman Lecture Hall. And we have 3 speakers in this session, which are going to be followed by a moderated panel discussion. On an administrative note, some of you may be unfamiliar with this. The residents to this building are located right outside the door. Follow the pathway through the glass door, through the hallway, all the way to the left is the restroom. If you have any questions, I'll be located up. We have exits both on the exit of the third classroom and to the front. My name is Scott Hall, and I teach ACTIS, AIS, and Bridge Watch Daily here at CMA. And I've been fortunate enough to conduct research in simulation pedagogy with particular emphasis on generational considerations and integration of electronic navigation. Some of the things that I'd like to talk about when we take a look at the definition of IMO, which kind of evolves, is the harmonized collection, integration, exchange, and presentation, and analysis of marine information on board and show by electronic means to enhance bird-to-bird navigation and related services for safety and security at sea and protection of the environment. We have 3 speakers today, and this section will have a couple of presentations which are going to cover over-reliance and situational awareness in the beginning. Then we're going to shift gears and we're going to take a look at an innovative approach to AIS for the small vessel community. So I want to first start with Mr. Ralph Brunei. He will be discussing his paper, Over-Reliance on E-Navigation and Case Studies from Investigation.
This goes nicely in the segue because during lunchtime we had AIG's Captain Jorge Pechi already introduced the subject, which I'm going to talk about, which is this over-reliance principle that especially old hats, old veterans of going to sea are always complaining about because they're not used to this new instrumentation. And I'm proposing here basically a sort of a compromise between this generational issue. More from the perspective of also having worked with underwriters on claims that have arisen and what lessons were learned from them. Now, I do not purport to be the latest expert on the latest electronic navigational instrumentation, especially integrated bridge environments. But I do know that there is an overlying principle of, and that will be the first part of my presentation, the principles of traditional navigational watchkeeping that have been based upon hundreds of years of navigation and have actually been successfully passed along through all these generations I'm talking about. Now, what form this navigation takes, of course, has evolved. And our industry, as you may admit, is very tradition-bound. We believe in our traditions because these are proven methods. So do not be surprised if initial reactions on board a ship for a new device may be rather skeptical. But there are many reasons for that. It is not meant personally. Now, I have 3 case studies that I will follow at the end. That's my second part of my presentation, where an error in judgment, sometimes combined with a failure of this navigational gear, has led to groundings. I'm not talking about collisions, although those have occurred as well. And the first case you will hear about it is something that is actually well known. I was not involved with that one. The second, the middle one, I have a tangential relationship with because I served on a sister ship at the same time that this company vessel had this problem. And the third case is an actual involvement I had as a surveyor on behalf of the insurance. All right, that's the preamble. should go over. It should come there. Huh? Trying to get to the next.
Should be the left side.
Is it the left side? Okay, sorry. You see, we already have an interactive situation. Now, in the old days, we had what we called radar hypnosis. So you can probably already put me into the correct time frame. I sailed about 10 years on foreign flag ships, and I've seen all kinds of examples of navigation. Now, we used to complain about that, especially the masters. You're not looking out the window enough. Doesn't that sound familiar? You're hunkered over that radar as if you were welded to it. However, the basic principle is what I'm trying to underline, that you don't fixate on one instrument just because you're trying to look busy. You're there to assist the captain or the pilot or both of them in their duties. And if you're on watch, you certainly should be aware of all the instrumentation that you have available to you. So that introduces the human element. And it doesn't matter how sophisticated your instruments are, or therefore how primitive it is. You should be aware of all the tools in an interactive environment. That means you versus the instruments, not the instruments talking to each other. That's the newfangled concept, which is great, but it depends then on how much the navigator can rely on these instruments to communicate with each other also effectively. That needs to be checked. That has to be an ongoing awareness for the navigator on the bridge. Now, is this truly a generational issue between what we used to have, our sextant versus what I represent here as being the latest Furono I could find on GPS? There are all kinds of other instruments out there. Is there a compromise possible? Is there something that can be done to upgrade the sextant to today's technology where you can still use the immutable, unchanging stars? Those could be a good backup to this. Why not consider the sextant or some aspect of celestial navigation as a backup to this newer electronic generation of instruments? So I'm going to bring up some suggestions as well. But let us talk about proper watchkeeping first. As was mentioned in another lecture, and I apologize, I'm not good with remembering names, but it was mentioned that radar Mark 1 was your visual sight, and of course your acuity. I had some problems with that. That means you've got to be looking out the window more than anything else. That's why you also have a lookout, and in some cases even the luxury of 2 lookouts posted. But as a basic backdrop to this, as a junior officer, you have your training to fall back on, and as a senior officer, your experience, and of course your training that you had before, as tempered by your experiences, because some of that training may not have been quite on the mark. Now, the principles of navigation do rely on the redundancy principle and cross-checking. And I'll bring some examples. The redundancy principle is layered. It goes from the top, which, how should I say, it's the first thing you see. It's that electronic aid, that navigational instrument. It's great, but many of them, like steering, the radio, each has a backup in case it fails. And it's no wonder you will find multiple GPS receivers on the chart table or on the bridge of a ship, because even now mariners don't trust the one GPS they have. They'd rather have a second one in case the first one has a problem. So those outages are very rare. Human senses are backup to the instrumentation. And then as a final underlying current, it's that experience. It will tell you what you should be doing. And if not that, it's instinct. It's a gut level that got the first mariners out to sea in the first place. They say, oh, I'm running into trouble. Of course, that's where we have standing orders. And the standing orders say, if in doubt, call me. And don't hesitate to do so if it's the captain's instructions. And I've used that, especially as a junior officer, quite a bit. Now, this can be regarded as a cycle, this cross-checking and verifying. So you've got a navigational tool. Don't use it on its own. You use it in tandem with other instruments. And you gain certainty based on multiple inputs. If one instrument doesn't agree with the other, and we'll get to that with the groundings, then you have a fault or an error or a propagation situation where you have to find out which instrument has the fault. So at least you are able to identify that there is an inherent error somewhere. And you get right back to that navigational tool, and you need to fix it, maintain it, and so it just goes on and on, round in that circle, to truly prepare you for watch how to run a ship at sea. Now, we were talking about upgrading the sextant, perhaps. You know you have the prime navigational tools up there in the firmament with the constellations. I have been in contact with a French firm that has developed something akin to an electronic sextant. And it looks like this. Now, it looks like it's only the size of a flashlight, but in reality, it's still a prototype. It's about 2 feet long, all right? So you have an idea. However, it has the ability to allow you to point this instrument with that part that has that clear screen at the celestial body. You press the black button, and it will acquire that altitude and the time. It has a built-in chronometer based upon software that's installed that can identify constellations. It's similar to what you have with your cell phone when you're using Google Stars or whatever, but a lot more sophisticated. And then by means of a USB cable, you download that sighting to your laptop or some other computer on board the ship, and it will give you a line of position. And the benefit there is you're using a backup, in effect, to the GPS, or a tandem system. And you can take multiple sides of the same star and throw out the ones you don't want. You don't have to go back and forth from the bridge wing to the chart table. You can take as many shots as you like. And don't worry about taking the time and running in to even look at a chronometer. It's all in the software. So this company, I'm not making an advertisement for it by any means. I'm just suggesting this as being a new venture, one that has promise not just for small boaters, but also for commercial ships. So, there could be a truce between old school and the new generation of navigators. All right, so we can all get along. So, why is this again? I'm going backwards. I'm used to, ahead, right? Now, I'm keeping quite close tabs with my tongue. I don't want to go over. But I have observed myself and heard stories of how human error even develops in a watch, and what human frailties truly are. And as I mentioned before, no matter how advanced your electronic system is, if you don't know how to use it, or you're not as well trained as you should be on the use, especially if it's a newer device that just could plop on your chart table, you better hold on. Because otherwise, you're just going to fall back on the proven, older, traditional methods you've been using all along. You'll forget about the new device, or you'll be forced to use it without having had proper training. Now, human errors, as we know, usually introduced by other factors as well. Fatigue, and as I said, the unfamiliarity with the latest generation devices. And if you like one instrument or another, you have your favorites. This is the better radar than that one, so we go to that radar. And it may be a fallacy, because the other radar may have a benefit to you that you were not quite aware of, especially after you've grounded it. And you may not be quite aware how these instruments, especially in an integrated bridge environment, actually communicate with each other, and that is another subject of study. If you don't know how they communicate and how they rely on each other, how are you supposed to know how even the output, the data, is being derived? First case study, Royal Majesty. Well-known case. It was back in '95, yes, a long time ago, but they did have GPS. And she was en route from Bermuda to Boston on a regular run. I've done that run, except it was Bermuda, New York, so it was just shortly after I left sea myself. And the issue was this being a virtual, I hate that word, it's a graphic representation of what the GPS readout read when that ship grounded. And there were many factors that led up to it. Now, many of you might already be familiar with this particular case, but I read the investigative report, and it was very detailed. But they seemed to concentrate more on the technical element than so much as the human element. That was kind of forgotten. People were very concerned about GPS. It was the Grail. We'd heard about it. We knew the military were using it. We said, when that day comes, when it arrives, that'll be like manna from heaven, because it is so reliable. Well, it was not on this instance. The cable that connected the antenna to the GPS unit on the bridge had been broken. It defaulted, and you will see this, into DR, or dead reckoning mode. It also gave this little symbol, SOL, solution. Solution question mark. You should follow that with a question mark, because the solution was in doubt. It was going on an estimated track. And this signal, there was a signal, it lasted about 1 minute, and no one heard it. Well, 1 minute, what am I saying? 1 minute, that would have been great. It was a short beat, about 4 seconds. It should not have been allowed to be shut off itself. It should have been manually shut off, and it should have been heard throughout the wheelhouse, but it wasn't. So, by the time the ship was to enter this channel, Boston traffic lanes, it had gone on a DR course, 15 miles off course, and they thought that they were heading towards the BA buoy, but the AR buoy, which was a red buoy, was showing up on the radar screen. So let me show that here. AR, BA. And there was an overlay. You see that? It's the same symbol for the traffic separation as appeared on the chart. And this was an overlay on the radar. Oops. I'll explain it a little later. There was a superimposition of radar picture and then the rendering from the nautical chart, it being an electronic version of the chart. So they thought they were okay, but there were many other cues that led to the grounding. So I won't go into detail. I'll just say this. There was a reason why they put the GPS receiver, this is the actual one on the ship, next to the Loran C. Both were digital readout, and the practice navigator could have made a comparison visually. He wouldn't even have to plot it. He would have known that there was a problem, because that readout did not coincide with that readout at all. They did a cursory check of the Loran on departure, because they had to do a bridge equipment check. But it was then forgotten. The Loran C was left in the dust. They were just looking at GPS and plotting everything with the GPS. The radar map was displayed from the GPS data. And the radar image, of course, relies on what the radar scanner sees. And the two were 50 miles apart. I hope I made that clear. It's sometimes a little more difficult to comprehend. The officer failed to run the second radar. He was on 6 mile scale. That's what you would use in tight traffic situations when you encounter other vessels. You want to have more, you're going to see this proper scale how to maneuver. But he didn't put on he didn't put on a second radar for 12 miles, or even change the scale. Just change the scale once in a while, because he would have seen he was really close to land. There were other cues. There were buoys. for each of these places. One for the channel, which had a whistle, the other one over the wreck, which normally signified by a bell, like all ships down. And lights. Each had a distinctive light pattern. Those cues were not followed. Photometer. That was another pre-departure check. They checked one. They had a digital one, not the old chart type. But it was set to 0 because otherwise it would have given an alarm in port in Bermuda. When they left port, they failed to switch it back on. Even the captain missed that. In the old days, we would hate to use the paper chart because you have to replace it or replenish the ink reservoirs. But there's no reason for that anymore. That's old style thinking. You got a digital one, keep it running. Channel 16, that was another problem. That dealt with the fact that some fishermen were trying to hail this passenger ship, and they heard the words cruise ship, cruise ship. And you go, oh wow, at least they know the class of ship we're on. But the officer only told them to get off the line, like they were bothering him. Terrible. You know, at least find out what he wants. So what I'm saying is there was a culture that crept in on that ship. It's a microcosm of a community, and all of a sudden new rules develop. Even though people know better, they go, well, I don't want to upset the others, especially the captain. I'm going to do it the easy way, like everyone else does. It's easy to come to the lowest common denominator. Lookouts. They decided light water. Wow, light blue to white. I'm sure they had never seen water of that color before on the preceding voyage. And all the officer on watch did was acknowledge it. He go, yeah, thank you. He should have been glad that the lookout reported anything, because it's a miracle when they do. Bermuda Star, she was close to where the Massachusetts Maritime Academy is located in Buzzards Bay, waiting to transit the Cape Cod Canal. It is a sister ship. I was on another vessel. I know the captain personally on the Bermuda Star, who was a great guy. He had 680 passengers on board. The ship was expected to hang around to wait for the fog to clear, because even the pilot who was already on board thought it was a bit problematical to even pursue something like this, to go through a canal as tight as that in what was near zero visibility. However, the captain went down to have breakfast with his wife. I know this, the grapevines on passenger ships are well developed. And who was left on the bridge? Who was the watchstander and the lookout? And I know the pilot wasn't around, even though I don't know. I mean, he wasn't there. They were trying to just wait, and they failed to take any kind of bearings and ranges with the radar that was there. This was pre-GPS days. They could have used Lorraine Seagull. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. So here, see where the entrance to the channel is? This is where the ship ended up on the rocks. We call this wind and curve. That was a bit too long waiting for the fog to lift without checking the position. That's simple. That was a complete absence of using any instrumentation, rather than, let's say, it was over-reliance on instrumentation, as in the first example that we tried to make. Case 3. Well, how many more minutes have I got? 2? 6. 6. A whole 6 minutes. Great. The core. Yeah, I'm usually reluctant to reveal names of ships because there's a confidentiality agreement between the surveyor and the underwriter, but this is a long time ago. And since we had the Royal Majesty, I figured we could also reveal this tanker's name. Thankfully, she was only in ballast. She was running in the southern Caribbean with a very lax crew and watch schedule and observations. They had GPS, yes, and they were relying on it exclusively. Once every hour, it went in religiously in that logbook, and that's all they did, even though they were in the vicinity of coral reefs. And how do we know that there were other ships that were similarly So the autopilot failed at minute, oh, it was just into the next hour of the watch. You know, it's like, you know, you're waiting for your watch to end. That's the kind of mentality that was prevailing among these officers. So 35 minutes after, so it must have been 25 into the hour, 35 minutes later, she ran around because she totally veered off. Now normally, you would hear the ticking over of the gyro compass card. You would feel the motion if you were the captain sitting on the loop down below. You would feel that the ship is actually moving when she shouldn't be maneuvering. You could always assume almost for another ship. But in this case, it was because no one noticed that the autopilot was no longer engaged. It happens. Should have been known to happen. But no one even cared. It seemed like it was a real lax system. Now, I hate to blame people. It is also a matter of supervision. If the captain doesn't come around once in a while to check on things, these things will develop. So, the ship ended up right here. I took the position off their wonderful GPS that they have. Right here, Utah Suima Bank, near Nicaragua. In other words, in the middle of nowhere. We had to come out there with a salvage tug to pull her off. We sacrificed the main engine in the process. It's allowed under underwriter's terms to run it into the ground if need be, to get the hull off the ship, which is a major cost factor. And as I said, there was no pollution incident. Though we had people from Nicaragua on board who were the environmental government types, two of them, to see how much of the coral was damaged, even back then. So, I told the captain, maybe you should take position fixes frequently when you're close to land, in quotation marks. So he understood, of course. You don't want to, you want to help these guys. You're not there to lecture. You're there to safeguard the asset for the underwriter. And they should have used piloting techniques because even those wrecks were marked on the chart. Could have used those wrecks as navigational beacons. Oh, I'm going the wrong way again. Oh yeah, all right. Now, some of the conclusions I made. Often, as I say, a second GPS is purchased because even now many mariners don't trust the one instrument they have because they're relying on it. Actually, in my estimation, too much. It is wonderful. It's a wonderful device, but it doesn't give you all the information you need. It certainly doesn't do the visual aspect that radar can or your own eyes. Now I'm suggesting as a future development, if we are relying on GPS receivers, we have more than one constellation of satellites also circling the globe from different nations. And they may find a way to create software or all-in-one where you switch from one GPS system to another. I know it's been mentioned during another lecture where they say they can use simultaneous satellites from these different systems at the same time. I don't know how that would work out. I'm not a programmer. But I would say maybe the switch over like we did from Omega to another system, Omega C or Deca. We had different Decas, transmitting stations. That would work quite well. And if there's a discrepancy between one set of GPS and another, that would trigger its own alarm. Something like that. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. It should be also better understood how the human-machine interface really works. It's better understood at top. This compartmentalized way of teaching about radar here and Deca here and whatever it is, GPS, should be actually also integrated. That classroom environment should basically include that aspect as if you were conducting a watch, so that you know how these actually communicate with each other, these different instruments. So a holistic way of teaching navigation. Now that means a whole new syllabus. It's a big challenge for an academy. And you could have a pre-departure bridge equipment checklist using a laptop. Instead of forgetting about that photometer, for instance, you'd have to sign off. you'd have to be sure that you signed off on it. The captain would check, oh, you checked it, you didn't leave it running. And you should not allow these junior officers to come on the bridge, if you're a captain, with some app and they're just playing around without it being totally integrated into the suite. Because if you're smuggling, that's what I consider smuggling. Smuggling apps on the bridge or different instruments will distract you from your stated duties. And so I'm kind of critical about that because they will